Well, good evening. We're really excited to have you all here this evening, and it's with a great pleasure that I welcome you to the America Society Council of the Americas for today's conversation with Carlos Loret de Mola on the evolving economics of Mexican drug cartels. Carlos, we are delighted. I can't see you through this. We are just delighted to have you here for the first time. And this is such an important conversation that we hope that tonight is just the beginning of multiple conversations on this topic. We would also like, is Sandra here? No, she's not here yet, so we won't welcome her. I don't know if, is Tony here? No, so we won't welcome him either. Before we begin, I would like to thank our 2015 Mexico Series sponsors, HSBC and MetLife. Thank you so much for all your support. It is so important to us. Before I begin, I would also like to thank our collaborator, Columbia Business School Latin American Business Association. Thank you, Andres. For organizing this with us. And I also want to welcome all of you that are joining us virtually from around the world via webcast. And I want to thank our global webcast sponsor, Telefonica. We've been having so many successful events that are webcast well into the thousands of people. Carlos Loret de Mola is a distinguished journalist and author of El Negocio, la Economía de México, atrapada por el narco-tráfico. He currently serves as an anchor and producer of Televisa's morning newscast, Primero Noticias, which reaches 35 million people every day in Mexico. Our webcasts don't quite get there, but we'll work on it, the U.S. and through Latin America. In the evening, he hosts Radio Formula's Contraportada. He also has a weekly column in El Universal called Reporters' Stories, and one in Fusion called Cartel Confidencial. I don't know how you have time to do all of this. In 2008, the World Economic Forum named him one of their young global leaders, and in 2007 and 2005, he was awarded the National Journalism Award in Mexico. This evening, we look forward to hearing his views on how the finances of Mexico's cartels have changed and morphed since 2008. Carlos, again, thank you for joining us, and we really look forward to your comments, and I think then we'll have some time for questions and answers. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me tonight. It's always great to be in New York, but especially to be here at the council. It's a fantastic opportunity for me to share one passion that it's not an everyday thing. It's not like the everyday news that I work with, but it's something that I've been working on for the past 15 years. It all started, and let me tell you a little bit about a personal story on this because it's crucial. I come from a family of journalists. My late father was a journalist. My father is a journalist. So I had no doubt that I wanted to be a journalist. I grew up smelling the fantastic aroma of the fresh ink in the newspapers that my dad and my granddad used to direct. So I was totally sure that I wanted to be a reporter. So I was eager to be a reporter, and I started as a reporter when I was in high school. I had a full time as a reporter while being a junior student in my hometown, Mérida, Yucatan, beautiful place, by the way. And whenever the high school finished, and then I had a decision about what should I study, I asked my colleagues, my other reporters who work with me in the same newspaper or in the TV station of Mérida and everything, well, what should I study? Should I study journalism or should I study communications or what? And everyone unanimously said, no, don't do that. don't go into journalism, don't go into communications. Study something that could help you understand what's going on with the news. We are talking past millennium. We're talking 1993, 1994, the last year of Carlos Salinas being president of Mexico. And the news were heavily influenced by what was happening with Mexican economy. Think about NAFTA, think about the political movements of 94, el EZLN, Subcomandante Marcos, and then the Colosio assassination, and then all the things that happened afterwards that were threatening the economy. I could understand what was happening politically, but I couldn't really understand what was happening with the economy. So I said, okay, I'm going to study economics. And I moved from Mérida, Yucatan, to Mexico City, and I started my bachelor's degree in economics at ITAM, el Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de México. Very nice and prestigious institution, by the way. So the first, second, third, fourth semesters did make sense. But then afterwards, it became very complicated. I did finish my degree and the whole thing, but when I had to write my thesis, I did what everyone else does, to do the thesis about whatever you're working on. And I worked as a reporter. I never stopped working as a reporter, even though I was studying economics in the ITAM. And I said, okay, there is something very important going on in Mexico. There is this huge discussion about drug trafficking, about cartels, about narco, but there isn't an economic view on this. And I'm totally convinced that there is no war against drugs, there is no law enforcement in terms of cartels, if you don't first of all understand what's the economy of the cartels. What's their weight in the economy? How big they are in terms of national product, in terms of creating jobs. And then from there, start fighting them with money laundering actions, and then you can start the cops and getting the heads of the cartels and all that. That is pretty much what the governments of Mexico have been doing for the past 3 or 4 administrations, just fighting the top CEOs of these big, huge enterprises. So I think if we start looking at the economy of the cartels, we are going to start understanding what is really going on with them, and then starting to create a better understanding and then a better way to embrace the problem and fight the cartels and ultimately control the huge violence that is attacking not only Mexico's image in terms of international views, but what the people in Mexico are suffering on an everyday basis. So that was 1999, the late 1999, past millennium. When I started to work with this, I spent a time in Sinaloa, in El Chapo's cartel, talking to El Chapo's producers, because I had to find out how much was to produce 1 kilo or 1 ton of marijuana, and how much was to transport the cocaine from Colombia, from Venezuela, from Peru, through Mexico to the United States. And then about heroin, the same thing, how many acres of terrain you need to grow the opium poppies and then to exploit them, and how many people you want. You need children, you need women, because you need someone who is very, very precise and very, the thin cuts you have to make in the opium poppy have to be like very slightly, very, I don't know, very, muy fino, no? In order to get the best amount. And then methamphetamine is the same thing. So at the end of the day, I discovered in 1999 that 1 kilogram of marijuana in Sinaloa costed $50. Then, if you moved it to Tijuana, to the northern border of Mexico, because it implied not only the transportation costs, but the corruption costs. In order to grow marijuana, you almost don't need to corrupt a lot of people. I don't know, I guess this thing about corruption in Mexico is totally new. But well, that very same kilo of marijuana, at the other side of the border, let's say San Diego or Laredo or Brownsville, Texas, it's worth $2,500. And if you distribute in small amounts for the consumers here in New York City, that kilo of marijuana that costed you $50 in Sinaloa is worth $10,000. Now, again, we're talking 1999, structure of the cartels, $1999. This is the heroin. It's pretty much the same thing. The farther you go with it, the more money you make. $10 for 1 kilo in Sinaloa, $400 at the border, $2,000 almost in New York City, in a retail way of putting it. Cocaine, if you bought it in Colombia, $2,500. The U.S. Mexico border, $45, and then distributed at a retail way in New York City. I'm sorry, I missed 1 0 there. $170,000. Methamphetamines, look how it grew. Tells you pretty much the same thing. And then the next question was, how many people do this? I mean, how many people have to take care of the corpse and not depend on the rain, but do some agricultural way of doing things? Then the Mexican authorities started to seize some marijuana as big as a Christmas tree with beautiful branches. I mean, marijuana, you could have it in your Christmas attaché. No? It was a huge plant, and the opium poppies that used to have 4 or 5 bulbs, they're now having 15 to 20 because the narcos are as well into genetics, and they're producing it better with smaller spaces. How many people you needed to do all this? And then each reached out that in 1996, there were like 730,000 people working for the narcos. That is a lot more people working for the narcos than for Pemex. A lot more people working for the narcos than for Telmex, not to say Televisa. It went down because of this genetics and some way of being more productive. But then the things changed a lot. It did change a lot. Because at that time, in 1999, my estimate was that in terms of gross national product, the branch of economics called narco-economics or narco-tráfico was worth it between 5 and 9% of the GNP. That is, for someone who is not very familiar with this, it's not as big as oil, but it's as big as the automotive industry. So it's a huge part of the economy in Mexico. What does that mean? There is quite a big hypocrisy when the government says, we want to destroy the narco cartels. Because if you do destroy the narco cartels and you take them down to zero, at the next day, at the next very morning, you have the biggest economic crisis in the history of Mexico. And a lot of those people that were having a way of living through the narco, a lot of those 300,000 to 700,000 people that worked for the narco cartels, they're not mostly violent, they're not mostly rich, as you would think. Mostly they are farmers, very poor farmers, that come into a crossroad that says, okay, you live in Sinaloa, you could grow tomatoes and make $10 a day, or work for the cartel and make $30 a day. You're not becoming rich because you earn $30 a day. You are not going to be walking around with big watches and big golden chains and beautiful cars. For you, as a narco employee, is the difference between having medicines for your children whenever they're sick or watch them die. It's a difference between paying the transportation to the nearest school or not providing for them a future. So I think we should think about this before condemning the whole thing. I think, don't misunderstand me on this, I think it's something to condemn, especially the violent, especially those in the top. But for the poor farmers that work for the narco cartels, whenever they have a choice, it's a surviving choice. It's not an ambition thing. It's not something we could condemn easily. And we should think about it. And it's because of the state not being able to provide good jobs, good opportunities, and some sort of future for them, that they become farmers for the local cartels. This was quite an easy job for me. I mean, I shouldn't have had any knowledge beyond second semester of economics to do this. But then the nicer part was this. In Mexico, there is the belief that if you become part of a cartel, then you will become rich. And that is not true. What you could observe in the detail is that having a better life for a person who works as a narco employee depends not on the fact that he is or he is not a narco employee, that if he stays as a legal farmer or an illegal one. No, it doesn't depend on that. It depends on how close you live physically to the local drug kingpin. Because as soon as this kingpin starts to become successful in the business, he starts bringing electricity to the community, and then building a school, and then building a hospital, and then having a supply chain so the grocery store becomes a supermarket. So if you live close to him, if you live in the same town as the kingpin, then you live better. But it doesn't depend on the fact that you are or not part of the cartel. Those were my conclusions in 1999. And I'm trying now, with the help of Columbia University, to create a task force of students across different areas, certainly journalists, but also lawyers and international relations students and economics and administration students, in order to move forward with this analysis and try to figure out in 2015 what's going on, because what we can anticipate is that it's been quite a different thing, or it is now quite a different thing than what it used to be in 1999, because the markets have changed a lot. And now let me explain you why. In 2000, Mexico's old ruling party, the PRI, after almost 80 years of governing, lost the election. President Vicente Fox was the first president of the modern era that was not from PRI. After 71 years in grip of power, PRI lost. But then something happened. The cartels and the drug leaders and the local arrangements that had been made and had been working for the past 70 years, for generations, were about to start again. So if you want to be optimistic, you could say, well, the new government didn't know how to fight cartels. If you want to be pessimistic, you can say the arrangements they had with the PRI were no longer important because PRI was no longer in power. Whatever the way you want to see it, it was a whole new world for the cartels. And something else happened the next year, the year after. In 2011 was 9/11. In 2001 was 9/11. The borders got a lot tighter, and it was very difficult for the cartels to move the drugs, the marijuana, the heroin, the heroin, the methamphetamines, and the cocaine from Mexico to the United States because of the tighter border. And a lot of drugs stayed in Mexico. From that year, Mexico stopped being just a production country and started to become a consumption country. And that was mostly because there were a lot of drugs available, and the cartels had to sell those drugs. They usually didn't sell them to the Mexicans, just a few of them, but then they had all these big stock and said, let's get rid of it, let's start a market on our own soil. And that did happen after 9/11, and that was a huge change of the market, more security of the border. That happened through Vicente Fox administration. At the very end of Fox administration, the violence started to rise at levels that Mexican citizens haven't had seen in our lives. Mostly people think that the years of the violence were those of Felipe Calderón, and certainly that was the main issue of his presidency. But the problem started in 2004 when Vicente Fox was president, and it started in Tamaulipas, and it started in Nuevo León, in the northern part of Mexico. The last 2 years of Fox, all the 6 years of Calderón, and then the 3 that President Peña Nieto so far. We had 2 different approaches. We had 2 different strategies. What happened to Peña Nieto's first 18 months? And I'm going to stop here for a minute. I remember after the first year and a half of Peña Nieto's administration, one very close friend, a great friend of mine, came to me and said, Carlos, what would you have said to me if at May 2012, when Peña Nieto's campaign was on crisis because of 132 movement, del Movimiento 132, and López Obrador was rising on the polls, and it was like a 4 or 5 points difference, and López Obrador was rising, and Peña Nieto was falling, what would you have said to me if at that point of the campaign I would have told you this forecast? Carlos, Peña Nieto is not only going to win the election, but he's going to make a huge pact with PAN and PRD and PRD, 2 main opposition parties. And together, the 3 of them are going to pass 11 structural reform bills through Congress, starting with your favorite one, the education one, but then a telecommunications one, giving a hit to Carlos Slim and giving a hit to Televisa as well. And then the jewel of the crown, the one single one reform that everyone who had dreamed with Mexican presidency for the past 3 or 4 elections wanted to do, the energy one. But not only that, he's going to put in jail your main personal enemy, the leader of the union of school teachers, and he's going to put in jail El Chapo Guzman. I said to him, well, I would have stopped the conversation right there. and take you as a fool. But all of that happened in 18 months. Those 18 months, Mexico stopped being the national capital of violence, the international capital of violence, and started to be the talk of the town. And the President Peña Nieto had, outside his room in the World Economic Forum in Davos, a long line of people to meet with him and with Secretary of Hacienda, Luis Videgaray, just to shake hands, just to see what kind of opportunity of business you had in Mexico, because Mexico was hot. But then it burned. Then it came in September, then it came Ayotzinapa, then it came October, and then came La Casa Blanca. And those two huge scandals torn apart whatever presidency Peña Nieto was trying to do, and he has not yet been able to recover, and it's been 1 year and a half. In terms of drug cartels, in terms of drug dealers, what was the difference between Felipe Calderón and Enrique Peña Nieto? After analyzing the whole thing and being there for a long time, I could tell you that the strategy is the exact same one. Actually, it's the exact same one that started in the last 2 years of President Fox. Which is it? If you have a big problem in a certain state, you just send a lot of troops. That's it. Whether it's federal police, whether it's military, whether it's the Marina, the Navy, the SEALs, you just send a lot of troops and try to fix it. What were the two main differences between Calderón's strategy and Peña Nieto's strategy? The first one was communication. And every specialist will tell you that communication is a key issue when we're talking about fighting crime. During Calderón's presidency, if the federal police would capture El Chanclas, just to name one drug dealer, the leader of the Zetas cartel in Puebla, no, just an example. The capture of El Chanclas was a matter of attention of every bureaucrat in the country. The president talked about the chanclas. Minister of Interior talked about the chanclas. The security, the PGR, and Marina and Defense, and almost everyone in the National Security Cabinet. But then if you ask the Minister of Finance, he would say, well, now we are investigating his finances. And then you ask the Secretary of State in Mexico, and she would say, well, we're analyzing if we're going to extradite him. Everyone, you would ask the governor, the local policeman who arrested him, the mayor of the town where El Chanclas went out. Everyone in the government was talking about El Chanclas. As a media outlet, you had that day 26, 27, 30 statements from different parts of the government talking about one thing, violence. And that was good news, capturing El Chanclas. If it was about 4 beheaded bodies found in Apatzingán, Michoacán, it was the same thing. 30 people talking about it. Imagine how many pages of the newspapers and time in radio and television took that. So we were talking a lot about this because everybody in the government was talking about this. So the first strategy of Peña Nieto was, we are not talking about this. Just 3 of us. PGR, Gobernación, Interior, Nation Fiscal, and no more than that. So the number of statements, the time, the air time you spent on this was a lot less. Instead, everyone else was talking about reforms, reforms, reforms. That didn't change the reality. The reality was as heavy as it used to be. the assassinations and the kidnaps were as heavy as they used to be, but the new reality was no one was talking about it. And that was a huge difference. It started to give the population a sense that, then they came, and suddenly things are getting easy. The second main change, and I think this is perhaps the most important one, the persons that were part of President Calderón's security cabinet hated and distrust each other at a heavy level. They would go to the president and accuse themselves of being involved with the cartels. That didn't happen. Peña Nieto kind of put them in order, and they started to work as a team. That no longer prevails, but at the beginning of the administration was correct. And that was a difference, because it does help if the federal police and the Marina and the Army are working together instead of working against each other. It does help. So the market was new, the strategy was old. What happened during Calderón's war against cartels? He inherited a market that was controlled by 4 or 5 big enterprises: El Chapo, Los Zetas, Arellano Felix, 3 or 4 or 5 main enterprises of the drug cartels. But then he started to arrest the heads of these cartels, and the cartels started to become cells and franchises. You could see Los Zetas everywhere, not because they were part of the same organization, but they bought the name. And he would call you and say, I am Los Zetas in Yucatan. There are no Zetas in Yucatan. No? Well, there are no Zetas in Tlaxcala. But a lot of local crime organizations, crime gangs, not even organizations, started to franchise with the names. And they would deal drugs, do kidnappings, extortion, and every illicit you could think about it in the name of an organization that they didn't even were part of it. At the same time, a new market in the United States opened, a market for heroin. It started this furor about heroin that has been in the news like for the past years. I'm sorry about this. So, used to be big enterprises, and now are small local cells of cartels. I mean, if you think about 40 years ago, there were only 2 main cartels, the Sinaloa cartel and the Gulf cartel. But then today we have the Sinaloa cartel, the Jalisco Nueva Generación, de Beltrán Leiva, de Juárez, de Milenio, de Tijuana, de Gulf, de Zetas, los Caballeros Templarios, la familia Michoacana, los Ardillos, los Rojos. You have a lot of people. I mean, it's almost a perfect competition market. No? Everyone is in there. No? And they are not only into the drug dealing business, but they started to do a lot of other things. Not only moving from marijuana and heroin, from this big, huge importance of marijuana that used to be like 30 to 60% of the income of the cartels. They moved to heroin, they moved to amphetamines, they moved to kidnapping, they moved to extortion, and they found new ways of earning money. At the same time, a new threat arose, and it was narco-terrorism. We could find only 2 or 3 episodes. We could not say that the narcos in Mexico are terrorists, but they have committed terrorist acts at a certain point, and I could say 2 of them very clearly. One is the one in the picture, El Casino Royal de Monterrey, where they burned 50 people. And the second one in Morelia, Michoacán, La Familia Michoacana, throwing grenades against the citizens that were gathered there for El Grito in the night of September 15. They moved to other drugs, see the source of origin of the U.S. wholesale level heroin seizures, and see how Mexico has been growing in the past 10 years. Take it from 2004 to current. Actually now, like 4 months ago, they captured a guy nicknamed El Gordo, the fat one. He lived in, I mean, everyone in the narco business could fit that nickname, right? But this was El Gordo, huh? El Gordo. Among every gordo, he was El Gordo. Huh? He was living in Chelem, a quiet, beautiful, peaceful beach town in Yucatan, in part of Progreso City. He was living there. They captured him. And for the DEA, El Gordo was the main importer of heroin to the United States. He had beaten, and that, I guess, is something to be proud about for him, the Talibans in this business. So there is someone who can beat the Talibans, and that is El Gordo in terms of importing heroin. He was the main introducer of heroin to the United States, El Gordo from Mexico. And he had his cartel in Guerrero. All the Sierra of Guerrero, it's full of opium poppy growing corpse. I mean, you couldn't imagine. I mean, you fly and you see them from an helicopter, like regular thing to see in the Sierra, if you don't get like shot from downstairs. So that was an important issue, but the thing is, Mexico is being the main provider, outside provider, not only for marijuana, but also for heroin, and you have this person that did the same thing. Then local US production declined. Mexican cartels moved in to fill the void. Stricter regulations in the United States regarding chemical precursors, as well as the ability of Mexican cartels to strike deals with global providers of chemical precursors. The Mexican authorities have told me that they have found cell phone chips from Michoacán in Singapore. That is the huge thing we're talking about. Meth is very easy to produce, doesn't need huge spaces on grounds, on acres. No, you just need a clandestine lab. It can be manufactured, doesn't have to be cultivated. Demand is also a big factor, and heroin consumption in the United States has been growing for the past 8 or 9 years, so that's another thing to understand. Then you have legalization, the other thing that kind of put the cartel main income at risk, which was marijuana. How are the cartel reacting to these new trends? Look at these are the explosion of cells and subgroups from 2012 to 2014. Look at all the cartels, 9 active cartels, how many cells they have in 2012 to 2014, and how many are there in 2015. This is a study that Eduardo Guerrero Gutierrez did, and he kind of, I liked it because he said, which are the national cartels, which are the regional cartels, who are just toll collectors, old cartels like Juarez, like Tijuana, that used to be huge organizations, but now they have like small local control, and they just charge you as a toll. No? Just for using their roads, and they have no longer like a national control, but they have local controls, and they have the cells, no? And we have two economic models. First of all, El Chapo model. What's El Chapo model of doing business in terms of drug dealing? He avoids confrontation with the government. He just does drugs. He doesn't go into kidnapping. He doesn't go into extortion. He does marijuana, cocaine, meth, heroin, but limits business to drugs. And that generates less externalities. He doesn't, I mean, that's why people love him. And that's why people shelter him. Because he creates jobs. And he provides an alternative of life that the state is not fulfilling to provide in those parts of Mexico that we cannot even see. And man, if the helicopters of the army cannot descend there, imagine the social welfare programs. And then you have the opposite model, which is like a Marxist model. And I think La Tuta, the leader of La Familia Michoacana, then Los Caballeros Templarios, is the main example of that. Because as a socialist state, he controls everything, from who is the mayor, who is the governor, who domains every economic activity. La Tuta, if you were a lemon growing farmer, he would seize your acres and starting to do your business instead of you. I mean, he did it with the big minor enterprises across Michoacán. He controlled the main port of Lázaro Cárdenas. He was the state as a total. Of course, he had deals with the governor, and he put the governor and so many members of his cabinet and so many mayors and so many police officers and chief police officers. I mean, he controlled the whole thing, the whole activity, the whole economic activity. Tackled all markets, avocado, lemons, mining, exported those products, avocados, lemons, mining. He was politically active, social media active, visible. There is no journalist in Mexico. I mean, if during El La Tuta reign, you didn't receive an offer of interview from La Tuta, you were nobody in the journalistic world in Mexico. He could reach every journalist and offer an interview. That was the size of his impunity. That was the size of his power. And that, of course, caused major externalities to society, because they would rape people, they would kidnap, they would do all sort of things that didn't make him a loved guy, like El Chapo is in some parts of Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua. La Tuta was hated. A lot of people hated the guy. So this is it. This is the new market. This is the way things are set now. And I think that if we do not understand the economies of the cartels, what models, economic models are they working in? Because there is something in between. And in between you can find something like Los Zetas, or El Golfo. They do not work like El Chapo in terms of not messing around with anybody. They do not work like La Tuta, seizing almost every activity of the economy, local economy, but they tax as another. I mean, you have in Mexico, in Tamaulipas, let's say it. In Tamaulipas, you have to pay the impuesto sobre la renta, el IVA, no? And the extortion. They have a 20% tax. And if you pay it, you're all right. So this could be like a hybrid model between El Chapo and La Tuta. I didn't want to put it there because it's not widespread, but it does work in some part of Mexico. Mexico has a lot of realities at the same time. I was talking a little bit earlier about the president that we have, or the presidents. And I'm not joking about this López Obrador insanity of being the president. No, I'm talking about who really is Enrique Peña Nieto. Is he the modern reformer of the first half of his so far 3-year administration? Or is he the old, immobile dinosaur of his second half of the 3-year administration? I think we're about to see that, because so far the score is 1-1, and there are 3 years to come. But as well, we have Querétaro, Aguascalientes, the whole Bajío area, San Luis Potosí, where last year economic growth was 14, 13, 16%, better than China. No? And then you have Michoacán, Guerrero, or the one that I think is the worst, Tamaulipas. We don't hear a lot about Tamaulipas on the news because there is no fighting going on there. There is no struggle about who wins, because in Tamaulipas, someone already won, and that's the organized crime. In Tamaulipas, the state has lost, and has lost for a lot of years since today. So I think that's the worst place in Mexico. In Guerrero and Michoacán, there's a fight trying to contain the cartels. In Tamaulipas is actually not real de facto part of Mexico. It's like a third state between United States and Mexico. It's a narco state, totally controlled by the narcos for at least 10 years, I would say. And I think that's the worst part of Mexico. But then you have Guerrero, then you have Michoacán, you have a lot of spots over there. But then you have places like Campeche or Yucatan, where the crime rate is lower than Switzerland, and that's a fact. So I think as Mexicans, we should and have some sort of responsibility of being complex about our analysis of our own country. And being complex about this analysis includes certainly to ask for some future, to ask for some demands to the government, and stop corruption and stop violence being the two main demands of the Mexican audience, but as well to understand that not everywhere in Mexico is Guerrero, not everywhere in Mexico is Ayotzinapa, and certainly not the whole country is the same. We have a huge country with huge different realities, and I think we should be able to understand los matices, I don't know how to say it in English, but the differences, no? The tones of gray between the black and white. And I think sometimes we don't know it. And I would blame the government for that. Because if someone is able to provide facts and elements of discussion that moderate the judgment, the international judgment about the administration that unfortunately inherits the problem to the Mexican citizens, is the government. And what would I say about this? Mexican society has moved up to a second level of demands. In the past 20 years, if we go to 1980, 30 years, 35, our main demand was that in Mexico, the votes counted, that the people who was elected was actually because they won the greater number of marks in the ballot. That wasn't a reality in 1980. No? You could get the most X marks on the ballot and do not win the election. Now we can have, with a lot of certainty, the knowledge that he or she who wins the greater number of ballots is going to be elected. And I think that's quite an accomplishment. But as a society, and it's perfectly fine and certainly desirable, we want more. And we now want to know how that winning campaign was financed. And I think politicians in Mexico are not meeting up that standard. They think, come on, all the votes count, you have enough. But let's move from that to public policy. In Mexico, a couple of decades ago, you could see a bill, budget bill passed through Congress, and in that budget you could see you are going to build a bridge in Veracruz. The money spent, and there was no bridge. Now we have, with some degree of certainty, a huge degree of certainty, the fact that that bridge is going to be there, and it's standing there, and it's kind of beautiful even. But we want to know as society who is the contractor and why he won that contract, and especially in exchange of what. So we have climbed to the second floor our demands as a society, and the politicians are not getting it. They think it's enough to count the votes. They think it's enough for the bridge to stand. And I think as a society, we shouldn't let down our expectations. We shouldn't take the stairs down to the first floor, but we should demand the public policymakers to climb up to the second floor. And I want to leave you with that, and I'm, of course, open to questions. Thank you very much for supporting me with your presence, and I'm so glad to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments. They went well beyond just the economics of drug cartels, and I'm sure have generated a huge number of questions. So, sure, let's start right here. And please identify yourself.
Oh, thank you. Yes, my name is Alvin Rodriguez, and I'm with the LaRouche Political Action Committee. As an economist and journalist, I'd like for you to respond to the following. Here in the United States, Glass-Steagall has been put on the table to reduce the size of banks, break up the big banks. It's a part of the House in the legislation and a part of the presidential debates. The reason why I bring up Glass-Steagall is because it would be used as a tool, FDR's Glass-Steagall, to not only break up the big banks, but something that seemed absent in your presentation was the role of banks, such as HSBC and Citicorp, in the funding and the transferring of funds of these drug monies through the United States, making them not only equal partners, but even bigger criminals in the destruction of these nations. And if you're serious about this type of reform, how can you not denounce these people, have them prosecuted, indicted, and then begin to then restore?
What's your question, please?
That's the question. Okay. How can you possibly go through an entire presentation and not talk about those criminals who are really responsible for how cartels and terrorism are funded worldwide?
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't stop in HSBC or Citi, but I think the main point of the presentation is to watch the finance of the cartels. And my first or second paragraph, if you could transcript my presentation, said, understand how big in terms of economy they are, and then fight them through money laundering. And what you're pointing out about these big banks is exactly that. I mean, I agree with you in terms of Certainly, there is no war on drugs if there is no dollar war on drugs. Because you could have El Chapo arrested or Chapo arrested again or killed for the first time. You could have La Tuta in jail. You could have Los Zetas leaders down or in jail, and wouldn't matter at all if you do not attack the big business. My book, the book that I base this presentation in, I don't know what word, here. It's called The Business. I mean, we should see it, first of all, as a business with access to the international banking system, and certainly those loads of money are not crossing the borders in big trucks. They are crossing the border with a click on a laptop. And that's through the banking system. And I am certain that one of the main benefactors of the size of the illegal criminal business being terrorism, being drug cartels, being whatever, are the finance institutions. We could set a point there, and I hope I was clear enough to point out that finance and then laundering the money is the issue, is the key issue.
Hi, yes. Vanessa Neumann, I work as a counter-illicit trade specialist between government and industry. At breakfast the other day, another breakfast talk, that Felipe Calderón said emphatically that he's opposed to the legalization of drugs. It's a question I like to ask to see, you know, because it's such a hot topic, and you mentioned that. What do you think about the legalization of drugs? How a lot of Central American presidents have come out in favor of it. Is it a good idea for Mexico? Calderón says it isn't.
I think it is. I think it is a good idea to try something different, at least. And I'm not talking about consumption. I'm talking about the whole approach to the issue. And I think the strategies that have been implemented so far have failed. So why not try something different? And I'm not going to go into morals or trying to predict if that is going to be good in terms of the health of our children or the availability of harder drugs in the market, because you could find very serious studies telling you one thing or the other. So you cannot predict the future, and economists know that, and we make a living out of that. So I think it's a good idea. I'm in favor of it, but I'm aware that almost 70% of the population in Mexico are against it. They favor using marijuana for medical purposes, but they against having it ready for consumption everywhere. So, and I think it's going to impact the finance of the cartels heavily. That's going to be a huge structural change for them.
They say, the rumor is that they lobbied against legalization, hired lobbyists in California.
When I was at El Chapo land in 1999, the guy that was like a fixer for me, the guy that I was with in Badiraguato and all those places, he said to me, "You want to have trouble here? You want to make Sinaloa burn? You want to have a true fight here? Legalize drugs. Because that is something the cartels are not going to like." So.
Yeah, all the way in the back.
Hello, I'm from the Schiller Institute, and I just have a question. What do you think about the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa, and if would Mexico joins the BRIC to reactivate the economy, and then for development and peace, and to reactivate the
I think it's a great thing Mexico knows on the BRICS.
Oh.
A great thing, because
yeah, because I think that reactivating the economies in Mexico is one of the three biggest economies in Latin America, and since you have so many resources over there regarding physical, all the physical resources of the people, very intelligent
Could you
people.
just ask the question and then let him answer it?
Yeah,
so we
sure.
can move on?
So what do you think about joining the BRICS?
Okay, I think it's not a club you want to be in. In so many ways, Mexico is better than Brazil, just to say the considered giant of Latin America. And almost every one of the 5,000 journalists that covered the World Cup last year can testify about that. I mean, when I was going to Brazil, it was my first time, and no hard feelings with the Brazilians. I think they are very critical of their own government and their own situation. I thought I was going to this Latin America paradise. I was one of those memorized by Lula's speeches and Lula's story until I set a foot on Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. I thought it was going to be better than Mexico, a lot better than Mexico. And I found out, and again, please don't take it wrong if you are from Brazil, I think it's closer to Cuba than to Mexico. So in some ways, as a Mexican citizen, I prefer not to be in the BRICS. Huh? And I think, I mean, if you do the things right in Mexico, you surpass the BRICS. And that happened to Peña Nieto in the first part of his 3-year administration. The problem is that he messed it up afterwards. But at the beginning, no one was talking about the BRICS, everyone was talking about Mexico. So I think you don't need to be in that club in order to do well.
In a sense, you're in a better club because over 80% of your exports go to the United States.
Yeah.
And we're fully integrated as in.
And NAFTA is a better club. NAFTA is a better club.
Back here.
Hola, buenas noches.
Buenas
Mi
noches.
nombre es Jaime González.
Mucho gusto, Jaime.
Yo no pertenezco a ninguna organización, nada, simple mexicano.
Gracias.
My question is, what can you tell us about Plan Merida?
Mhm.
Do you think it's helping Mexico, or do you think it's hurting Mexico?
I think Plan Merida it's more, has occupied more airtime in the electronic media and more newspaper pages, that the real importance and influence of it in terms of fighting drug cartels. The money is not very much. The helicopters are old and come late, and it's quite a struggle for the Mexican government to get the help promised there. So I don't think it's as important as everybody thinks. I think something parallel to the Plan Merida is of a huge importance, and that was the construction of direct bridges from the American institutions to the Mexican institutions. If El Chapo got captured, then released, but then if El Chapo got captured, it was not because of Plan Merida, but it was because of the trust between the US government and the Navy SEALs of Mexico. And to say it precisely, from the DEA to the Mexican Navy. So those bridges that were built during the Calderon administration and Plan Merida being just rhetorical, those bridges, I think they are more important than the Plan Merida itself.
So I'm going to ask a question. So if you were the exclusive advisor to the President of Mexico or the President of Mexico, how would you work to dismantle the drug cartels in Mexico?
Well, if I was the President of Mexico, first thing, I would memorize 3 titles of books that would influence my life, even though I hadn't read them, no? Because some questions could make you in a lot of trouble, and then just memorize them, come on, huh? The second thing is, fortunately for me, I have never been tempted by the office. So I do not know what you do. I don't want to know. And being a journalist is a very comfortable position because you can point out the problems and you don't have to address them. So if you don't mind, I want to stay in this beautiful bed of journalism and let you, the intelligent people, to address the problems that we journalists point out.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Hi. Well, we have been. Oh yes. My name is Silvia Ceballos. I am Mexican, and I have been living outside of Mexico for almost 20 years.
Mm.
But we go there regularly, and it's always a very difficult situation with family and things like that. So it's been a problem for a very long time, as you certainly said. So do you think that Mexico, as a government, as a country, is really prepared to fight, or this has gone beyond Mexico on force, and Mexico needs help from other countries?
I would certainly say so. I mean, these are international organizations who can have people across not only the continent, but in Asia and Europe, and they distribute the drugs there. I mean, like, what I think is the main cartel now in Mexico, Jalisco Nueva Generación, I would say is the wealthiest, the most powerful, and perhaps the most dangerous, has branches in Europe, in Asia, and of course, across the Americas. So you should certainly address it as an international thing. No country can fight by himself. No? They can capture by themselves a leader, but not dismantle a cartel. They need help, especially from the United States, because of the capacities and technology in terms of espionage and intelligence information that they have, but also with the southern countries, speaking Mexico, southern countries in terms of their own intelligence, their own information, because these are multinationals, no? And they work as multinationals.
Hola, Carlos. Mariano Gutierrez with MetLife. We all know, we follow you, you're very passionate about education reform.
Yes,
It's something you know well. Can you tell us what else needs to be done from your own perspective, how far we've come so far, and what else needs to be done to really fix this huge problem we have in Mexico?
Well, I think the education reform approved with the concurrence of the three main parties in Mexico is certainly in the right way of the most successful education systems in the world, to use the usual suspect, Finland, South Korea. No? It's in the right way. But it is not something that is going to give you revenues in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You are going to start seeing and feeling the difference in 15 to 20 years. So it's a very long-term investment and almost a millenary investment in terms of Mexican eager to get gains immediately. So I think what has been done was correctly. Now you have to apply it on the schools. If you apply every single word of the education reform to Mexican reality, you will have a huge success in the long term. Applying the reform has been challenged, especially by the unions. So you have to be strong on that as a government. But the good thing is that, differently from other reforms, the society is becoming very active, supporting the government in this particular reform. People likes the education reform, and people hates what the unions are doing. So that gives the government a big muscle in terms of applying the law. And the second thing I would say is something that is not included in the reform and it's hugely needed is infrastructure for the schools. You have terrible schools, and I could tell you tons of examples that schools do not have ceiling or walls or bathroom or not even a basketball court for the kids to, no. So you need to invest money on infrastructure for the schools. And thirdly, I would say rethinking the scholarship programs. And I would say that we're still learning, like if it was 1970, and we haven't incorporated technology, connectivity, and these concepts. We're still memorizing things, and memorizing is not relevant anymore. I remember when I was in high school, my teachers made me memorize the periodic table in chemistry. And I struggled with that. I remember it's kind of some sort of a trauma for me. And once I interviewed Dr. Molina, the Nobel Chemistry Prize, Mexican, Nobel laureate in chemistry, and I asked him, Doctor, do you know the periodic table by heart? And he said, no. And the guy was the Nobel Prize. But in our schools, they are torturing our kids with the table. So we have to move up a little bit. Don't think that we have the table on the internet. Let's understand what the table is for and forget about memorizing. And we spend weeks and weeks of chemistry classes now in Mexico City and in Mexico, the whole country, trying to memorize the thing. So I think we have to adapt that. And I think the programs are like the third thing, being implementing the reform, infrastructure, and modernizing the programs. Thank you.
Okay, so we have time for one more question. Let's take it here. Maybe we'll take like 2 questions
Certainly.
or 3 questions. You can answer them all together. So identify yourself.
Yes, hello. Alejandra Cadena, mucho gusto, soy de México también. Just a quick question. What is the talk in Los Pinos about the upcoming American election? And if that is going to affect somehow the drug cartel's economy as well?
Well, despite what everybody says, I work in Televisa, and Televisa is not Los Pinos. I know it's hard to believe, but because what is being said about Televisa and Los Pinos, but I don't work in Los Pinos, so I don't know what they're saying. But let me tell you a little bit about what I've heard, because I do have sources. They're afraid of Donald Trump. And I think, I don't know, I think if you have Latin blood in your body and you're not afraid of Donald Trump, you don't have Latin blood in your blood. So they're afraid of that. But they still hope that he doesn't even win the nomination. They're watching it that way. They think he's not going to be the candidate of the Republican Party. And now, so it's something that worries them, but not very much. And I would say they cannot tell it on the record because they wouldn't want to interfere in American politics. And of course, the United States never interferes in Mexican politics. But they are Hillary Clinton's fans. Now, they love the way she thinks about Mexico, and they love the way Bill Clinton loves Mexico. And they would love Hillary Clinton being president, not because of the racism of Trump, but because the way she and her husband, I mean, Bill Clinton saved Mexico from an even deeper crisis in 1995. I mean, it could have been even worse if Bill Clinton wasn't in office. So in top officers' memories, that's still a fact. And Hillary Clinton does understand Mexico, and I think they would be cheering for her. But they wouldn't tell you that on the record, and they're seeing it that way. The other thing, and we were talking about that earlier, is that as a response to Donald Trump, and watching the actual facts, the actual figures, Mexican government should say to Donald Trump that if he continues sending people to Mexico, Mexico is going to build a wall and make him pay for it. Because if you watch the facts, for the past 4 or 5 years, the net migration is negative. So it's the United States sending people to Mexico and not backwards. So I don't know, President Peña Nieto should face him and say to him, well, if you continue sending people illegally to my country, I'm going to put a wall on the border. I'm going to make you pay for that. I don't know. But Mexico should engage more in this debate, as we were talking before, and I was totally convinced of what I heard, not directly engaging him, but certainly providing the real facts of the discussion. Thank you very much. Good night.